listening to Legal Talk Network.
Hello, and welcome to our podcast live from the ABA section of Antitrust Law Spring Meeting 2018. This is Gregory McLean, and I am the host for today's episode, which is being recorded on location at the ABA section of Antitrust Law Spring Meeting 2018 in Washington, D.C. Joining me now, I have Suzanne Wachsstock from Amex, Forrest Treat from Microsoft, and Gail Levine from Uber. Welcome to the show. Before we get started, I wanted to say that the views of my guests are theirs and theirs alone, and they do not represent the views of their employers. So with that being said, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourselves, about where you work, what you do, and let's start with Suzanne.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So I am Chief Antitrust Counsel at American Express. So I have global responsibility for all kinds of antitrust issues, mergers, litigation. I'm not a litigator, but I work closely with our litigators on all antitrust cases, as well as counseling and compliance. In that role, I do have a colleague who's based in London who handles the European issues, but I have kind of responsibility for the rest of the world. And it's been a huge variety of issues, and it's been fascinating. And I've been there for 10 years.
Great. Forrest.
Well, I am a senior attorney at Microsoft. I am a member of our competition law group, which is composed of 5 pure antitrust lawyers and a team leader. We also have antitrust counsel in Asia and Europe as well, who help us out in those regions specifically. It's a great team, and we focus on all areas of antitrust, in particular counseling, regulatory investigations, and we help out on litigation as well. We divide our work up by product group mostly. So I support our cloud and enterprise team, which covers Microsoft products such as Azure, SQL Server, Visual Studio, and some of our other cloud and enterprise focused products, as well as the Microsoft retail stores.
Great. Thank you, Forrest. Gail?
Hi, I'm the Chief Competition Counsel for the United States at Uber. Now, I was hired into the company, into Uber, about a year and a half ago to lead our regulatory affairs team for the United States. But I've only been at Uber for a year and a half. In Uber years, that seems
It's a lifetime.
Indeed, a lifetime. It's been terrific. It's been a wonderful place to work. Before coming to Uber, I was 10 years at Verizon, where I really got a taste of what one of the best advantages of being an in-house counsel. It's the diversity of work. You do a lot of all of the folks you're talking to today can speak to the antitrust experience, but we probably can all also speak to non-antitrust roles we've enjoyed in our companies. So, for example, at Verizon, I did antitrust work, of course, but I was also doing strategic projects for our general counsel. I headed our patent team when I was at Verizon, did policy work, data security work. One of the real joys of being in-house is that you get to serve your clients in any need, with respect to any need they have.
Great. That's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. You actually touched on my next question, which was to give us a little bit of background about your educational and employment experience before you join your respective employers. So very interesting to hear about your breadth of experience at Verizon. Forrest, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you did before you got to Microsoft and what led you there.
Sure. Well, I have an undergraduate degree in business management, and then I went to Georgetown for law school. And right after law school, I started out at DLA Piper. I was an antitrust litigator right from the start. I got my start on the air cargo cases back in the mid-2000s, and moved from there into doing some other antitrust litigation work as well as merger work. I moved over to Shearman & Sterling in 2009, and from there I continued working on mostly antitrust litigation cases as well as some other more general litigation and government investigation type cases. I came to Microsoft in 2012, and I think I came to Microsoft because I've always had a huge interest in technology. I think I was able to make that very apparent to Microsoft in my application materials and my interview, and Microsoft was really kind of top of my list in terms of potential employers. So I think it worked out well for both of us, and it was meant to be.
Great. I'm happy to hear that. Suzanne.
So I always like to tell this story that I was at Harvard for law school, but antitrust sounded boring, so I didn't take it. And then I came to Davis Polk as my first job out of law school, and I happened to sit on the same floor as the antitrust litigators. So they brought me into a few matters. I did deal work, and then I started doing litigation, and I really fell in love with it. And one of the partners I worked closely with there made the point of saying he preferred to work with young associates who had not taken antitrust in law school, because he said the people who took it were always thinking about what the law should be. And he said, I don't care what the law should be. I need you to understand what the law is. So I thought that was a good lesson to take with me. And I was at Davis Polk for about 3 years, and then I moved to a firm in Connecticut, Wigan and Dana. I started off doing complex civil litigation, appellate, white collar, and antitrust. And a few years in, my mentors at the firm said it would be good for the firm and for me to specialize. And collectively, we decided antitrust would be a great focus. And that was really when I became a full-fledged, as a fifth year or so, full-fledged antitrust lawyer. I stayed at Wigan for 9 years. I was a partner there. I wasn't really looking, but I saw that Amex was looking for an in-house lawyer, and I talked to folks and loved them, and that was in 2007. And it's been a pretty busy 10 years.
Oh, that's great. So, Forrest, Suzanne, you've told me a little bit about your experience in private practice. Gail, did you work in private practice before joining Verizon?
I didn't. I worked for the government.
Oh, okay.
I spent about 10 years all in at first the Justice Department and then at the Federal Trade Commission. When I was at the Justice Department, I came in through the honors program and was a federal district court litigator for the United States in the federal programs branch of the civil division. When I was there, I handled a number of cases. The nice thing about when you work for the government, by the way, is that you have the privilege of making all your own mistakes. And you can do that from you handle discovery, you handle document production, you handle the mundane to the issues like settling the case, negotiating the settlement, arguing in front of judges in district court. After doing that for about 5 or 6 years, to where I felt like I had learned quite solidly how to litigate a case, I moved over to from the Justice Department over to the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission in that time, this is 1999, was really doing the cutting edge work in the federal government on high-tech issues. So I joined there to work on a lot of high-tech innovation issues, first in the General Counsel's office, and then for the chairman.
Oh, that's great. So that background in high tech certainly helped, I'm sure, as you moved into an in-house role. So what would you say are the most striking differences between government work and your in-house role? And in particular, what do you like the most about an in-house position?
The best thing about working at both Uber and Verizon is being close to my clients. I've been privileged to work for business people who are absolutely passionate about what they're doing and about the services they're offering to our users, and it's just a treat to get to work for them.
Forrest, same question, but definitely curious to know what the distinctions are for you between private practice and in-house, and what you really like about being in-house at Microsoft.
Well, sure. I think the biggest one that people notice first is the lack of billable hours. It's nice to get out from under that sort of day-to-day stress, and the focus is really just on getting the work done. And once the work is done, you're done. And it's a nice feeling.
Does your work ever get done?
That begs that question. Yeah.
You at Microsoft, you guys are very efficient.
Yes, we're efficient but busy for sure. But it's nice to not have to keep track of what you're billing the clients for, and I think that actually makes things more efficient. I also agree with Gail on that. It lets you get really close to your clients, and I love that part about it. It's so nice to be able to really get a deep focus on the business side of things and the industry that you're in. And I think being in-house allows you to do that to a greater extent than being a law firm lawyer, just purely from the circumstance that law firm lawyers have multiple clients, and those clients might be in multiple different industries and certainly different businesses and business models. So that's a second advantage. And I think the other thing that I've noticed about in-house practice is that it's far more about what can be accomplished practically than in theory, and I think that's something that law firms are very good at is coming up with the theory of how things should work and what you should be able to accomplish. Whereas when you're in-house and you know your clients and you know what your clients' capabilities are, as well as their limitations, it gives you a much better view of what can be accomplished from a practical sense rather than a theoretical sense. And that's an important difference.
Of course. Very interesting. Suzanne, same question.
Sure. Yeah, and I would echo everything that Gail and Forrest have said. I guess what I would add is when I left my firm, I was a young partner, and so everything's about rainmaking and trying to find clients and business. And I like to say that when I came in-house, it became about finding an umbrella big enough because everything's coming down at you. And I really, it took a little while to get used to that, but I love that about it. It's constant. I don't think I could keep track of my time if I needed to because there's so many issues coming from every direction. And you're not, as Forrest said, it's not theoretical. These are real questions. They're real clients. And so you're really dealing with practical issues all day long. And I think the other thing I would say is that when I took the job, somebody who was close to the company at the time told me that she actually had been in the role before I came, and she told me that she felt that the role, antitrust is kind of the best role at the company because you touch everything. You're not isolated to any particular business unit or part of the company. I work with everyone across the company globally, and I think surprisingly, I've touched a breadth of antitrust issues that I really wouldn't have expected, and I really have a connection with clients across the company and business units, and it's been no days boring.
That's great to hear. Nobody likes boring days, that's for sure. So turning actually back to something that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Suzanne, I always find it fascinating. So many antitrust lawyers kind of end up in antitrust accidentally. I'm one of them. It's at least in Canada, we don't really hear about it. It's not marketed to us as an area of law you can practice. So I fell into it accidentally when I just articled at a law firm and got roped into a case and it ended up just changing my life. It was great. So here we are talking to presumably young lawyers, young students, hopefully who have an interest in antitrust or are curious about antitrust. So what would you recommend to them, those young lawyers who may not know much, or young almost lawyers who may not know much and want to know more about potentially being an antitrust lawyer?
Yeah, I don't know if you're asking about advice or where they can learn more, but let me start maybe with advice, I guess.
I'd say both.
Okay. So just as a piece of advice, I guess, somebody said this to me very early in my career, and it was probably the best advice that I got, which is don't assume you know what your next step will be. Be open-minded. Learn everything you can, talk to as many people as you can, get involved, and I think we'll talk about this section. I think it's been a terrific way to meet people and learn about the space. But I think just in general, be open-minded. I would not have anticipated that I would end up in-house at American Express 15 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly not in law school. And that's been, I think, a great pleasure of my career has been, kind of things evolving organically and not always knowing what the next step would be.
It's great. Forrest, anything to add?
I don't know that I can top that answer. It's so good. But I would say, there are a ton of opportunities to both network and learn about antitrust. If you're still a law student, certainly take an antitrust class. Why not? But, Greg, I was like you. I kind of fell into antitrust after I had already graduated. I think what gave me the most value was networking at events, as well as sort of getting a little bit nerdy about it and going on the internet and reading papers, because if there's one thing antitrust lawyers love to do, it's write papers. And they're all over the place, and there's such a wealth of information on the internet that you can study up on and learn more about antitrust, and not only get kind of deeply involved in some of the hot topics, but also, just see if you're interested in it.
That's great advice. And Gail, anything to add?
I'll second all of that and add one more bit of advice. If you're serious about thinking about antitrust, embrace economics. Read up on it, take classes on law and economics. For goodness sake, read Freakonomics or listen to their podcast or all of those, all of that literature on economics and rational thinking. One of the beauties of being an antitrust lawyer is that you've become, when you become one, you become part of a philosophy of thinking like a business person, right? You're forced to think about the economics of the company's decisions, about what it does, how its actions affect the market, how the market reacts to its decisions. You start thinking like an economist. You start thinking like a business person. And that's one of the disciplines of this corner of the law that I've enjoyed the most.
That's right. Take your economics courses. Very good advice. I have sort of two more questions, but we'll try this one. So what do you think will be the key antitrust enforcement and compliance trends in the coming years that young or future practitioners should become well-versed in? Gail, you want to start?
I think you absolutely need to know your American law, but you also need to know about international law, too. Some of the critical movements in antitrust law have happened not just here in Washington, but also overseas. So get smart on your U.S. law, but also get smart on what's going on overseas.
I think that's great advice. As a Canadian lawyer, we have to follow closely American law because there's so many similarities between our antitrust laws and yours, but also your law is just so much better developed than ours. We're part of the reason why we're here so often at these meetings is to make sure we're on top of it, and we can get that international perspective. That's great advice. Forrest?
Yeah, I would totally second what Gail said, and even to follow up on what you said. We are seeing, because the law is so mature in the United States, we're seeing a lot of movement and development internationally, and so anyone who's interested in antitrust law should keep an eye at least on developments overseas. And in terms of specific topics, I have a very tech focus, as you might imagine. So I'd say we're seeing the most interest in topics like big data, platforms and platform regulation, and artificial intelligence.
All topics that are the subject of panels either this year or in previous years, and so this is a great opportunity here to learn up on those. Suzanne. Yeah,
I guess Forrest stole my thunder. I was going to say big data, algorithms, AI. I mean, I think there were 3 panels already that I've been in on those topics, and it's one of those areas that I think young lawyers listening to this probably know a lot more about the technical side than I do. I'm not going to speak for the group, but certainly than I do. So I think though what I would emphasize though, and this was emphasized in some of the panels, is that the principles are still what they were decades ago. The law is evolving, but the principles apply to new facts. So I think everyone needs to be really well versed in the basics, and then apply that to whatever the hot area happens to be. And again, I think now it is big data and tech, but whatever it is, the basic principles of antitrust law are what they are, U.S., Europe, and elsewhere.
And I'll add to Suzanne and to Forrest's list by putting in privacy into the mix too. I think that and Forrest, you already alluded to it by talking about big data, but I'll just call it out expressly. I think that there is in the vanguard of antitrust intellectual leadership. There are concepts that point toward a relationship between antitrust law and privacy law that I think are going to be explored much more deeply in the future.
I agree. I think that's great advice. So for my last question, I want you should tell me a little bit about your role in the section. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you've gotten involved, how the section has helped you, how you've contributed to the section, to help give our listeners an idea of how they can maybe get involved and do their part. You want to start with you, Gail?
So over the years, I've been involved with the section in a number of roles, but some of my favorites have been as a vice chair of what used to be called the Computer an internet committee. Isn't that quaint? That there was a committee that was dedicated to the computer. It's like imagining a committee that was dedicated to the pen or pen and paper. But yes, being a vice chair of that committee was a great pleasure, and then later a chair. I loved serving on the council for a number of years and on the nominating committee and other roles. If I had advice to a young lawyer interested in getting more involved in antitrust today, I would say volunteer, get engaged. It almost doesn't matter what role you volunteer for, but volunteer. It's a great opportunity to learn a lot about the law and to meet people who are as excited about the legal developments and about the important business their clients are up to as you are.
Yeah, 100%. And that's how I got my start in the section. I volunteered. I helped to write some of the annual updates to antitrust law developments. I worked on site checking and blue booking articles and various papers. My boss at the time was fairly involved in the section, but that kind of evolved into a role in the leadership. So I started out as a vice chair on the Books and Treatises Committee about 6 years ago. I moved a couple of years ago on to the Unilateral Conduct Committee, where I'm also a vice chair. And I think just volunteering, the section needs so much help from volunteers that it's very easy to get in on that level and help out there. And from there, getting involved in whatever opportunities you might want to get involved in is fairly simple. And the networking is great, so I can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Suzanne?
Yeah, so I'll echo what everybody has said. I guess my involvement started fairly early in my career. One of my mentors was very involved in this section, and he encouraged me. Over the years, I've been chair and vice chair of Distribution and Franchising Committee, Insurance and Financial Services. I've been on a task force. I'm currently co-chair of the Corporate Counseling Committee. I would highly recommend if people want to get materials, look on the website, and also, as everyone has said, please, we need volunteers. And I really can't speak highly enough about the networking opportunities. I mean, it helps you meet people in government, you meet colleagues in in-house. For folks who are in law firms, just there's so many opportunities just to meet people outside your small circle, and it's also fun. We have good friends within the section now, and it's a terrific, we love getting together, and there are lots of opportunities, as well as the opportunities to work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, especially this meeting, for sure. Mm-hmm. So I think that brings us to the end of our program. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today and for your valuable insight. I think our listeners will appreciate it. If our listeners have questions, wish to follow up on you, how should they reach you? Gail?
Gail.Levine@uber.com.
You can look me up, Forrest Treat on LinkedIn.
Look me up, Suzanne Wachsstock at LinkedIn. I think giving my email would take too long.
Great. Well, that's great. This concludes another podcast from the ABA section of Antitrust Law, Spring Meeting 2018. If you like what you heard, please find us and rate us in Apple Podcasts. I'm Greg McLean, and until next time, thank you for listening.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.